everyone, and welcome to Growing Together, a gardening podcast with me, John Lamb, and Don Kinsler, a lifelong gardener and the North Dakota State University Extension horticulturist for Cass County. Don, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. I have loved this fall, the extended time to get things done.
Yeah.
It's
just enjoyable weather.
Oh, man, the weather's wonderful. Last evening, after I got home from work, I lifted the geraniums out of the pots up at the front of our house, lifted those out. I cut them back, pot them up in 4-inch pots, put them under lights in the basement, LEDs, and they grow all winter long there. And by next May, we'll have geraniums to put out again. So I'm already preparing for next spring. But in the meantime, gosh, what beautiful weather. And I know frost is coming.
Yep.
We might even, by the time this podcast airs, we might have already had our first killing frost. But first killing frost in mid-October.
I know. It's really, really late. And just
because I think there's only been killing frost maybe in the very upper northernmost area.
Yeah. We haven't had anything down here. I mean, it really hasn't even touched.
No, but I know what's coming, so I wanted to get those geraniums all lifted out. But boy, they're in such heavy bloom, I almost hated to lift them up out of the pots.
Yeah.
I bare root them and then cut them way back to only a couple inches above soil level. And then pot them up again, and that takes less space. So last night I did 45, and tonight should do about another 45. We aim for overwintering about 100 of them, and it works really, really well.
Yeah, well, a huge cost saver, for one thing.
It is, because if I save a little money on geraniums, then I've got money to buy some trees or a shrub or a few new perennials. So it's not always about getting things on the cheap.
Right.
It's, I use that money elsewhere at the garden center.
Exactly. It's a reallocating of funds, I believe is the way that they call it.
Yes.
But yeah, with the frost coming, it does kind of signal, it seems like we've been talking about the end of the growing season, and it just doesn't end.
Exactly.
In fact, I was out watering yesterday some things that I recently planted. And,
I was too.
Just to make sure that it got, because it's been very, very dry. But it's been quite a season, and it's been actually a very long gardening season for us, hasn't it?
It has. It started off fairly early. When I say fairly early, well, it'll be interesting to kind of rehash how the growing season has been.
Yeah.
So it's been interesting, but it seems like this has been a little typical in that we've gotten more time at the end of the growing season these last few years.
Yeah.
The frosts haven't come as early. I remember when I think I was in high school, we had a killing frost in August, late August, which isn't unusual. But it seems these last number of years, the frosts are coming a little later, and that's fine with me.
It's really almost kind of been a tale of two seasons, really, two growing seasons, because we started off really nice and wet, and sometimes maybe even too wet to get it in the garden too early. But we didn't have a lot of snow from the winter, but we had good rains in the first half of the summer, and the second half of the summer, dry.
Yeah, I love that, the tale of two growing seasons, and that is so accurate. I do not remember a growing season, and I enjoy remembering and thinking back on various growing seasons, because some are kind of like landmark growing seasons, droughts, too much rain, etc., floods. But anyway, I don't remember a growing season that had these two, like you say, a tale of two growing seasons where the first part of the season was so wet, so rainy, and then it turned just dry.
Yeah.
Some parts got decent rain throughout, but for a lot of the area, it turned from too wet to drought, because now there are drought concerns. And so it's, the tale of two growing seasons. I like that.
When you did see it, I mean, almost up, I'm not sure when the exact date was, but it seemed like really through almost like the peak, right before that what we think of as the peak for the peak time in gardens, mid-July. It seemed like right before then, that was maybe we had a little bit of rain in early July, but then that was it. And it just I think all of August and September were maybe a couple of sprinkles, but no real substantial rains.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more in depth. Okay, so the spring started out with generous rains. Okay, we didn't have snow cover, so there wasn't going to be a lot of snow melt. But the weather people tell us most of that runs off anyway, so I wasn't concerned from the lack of snow. Okay, and then generous rains started in was it late April or May? Oh, and I was so happy because the grass, you could just feel it drinking it in. We've had, 3 or 4 pretty dry years.
Yeah.
And you could just see the grass. And the grass started in May, greening up, nice moisture. The trees, everything budding out. I was so grateful that we were getting this nice, generous moisture and relatively cool weather.
Mm-hmm.
And in May, I wasn't overly alarmed when I couldn't get our vegetable garden in because it was nice. And I remember saying, as that wet period kind of started to linger, I remember saying, well, I hate to disrespect rain,
right?
Because we know the alternative, but the rain kind of kept on, and the grass was nice and green, and I was happy. And also with the cooler weather and the moisture, the peonies were just beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And the flowering crab apples bloomed extensively because we didn't get hot, dry winds that fried everything all off. And the iris in June, I remember us commenting, the iris are just beautiful. And they're blooming longer because we aren't having hot, dry winds that blast them all apart. And so the iris did beautifully. And, of course, the moisture kind of continued. And we finally got our vegetable garden in mid-June, which was, that's okay, but that's like a month later, for many of us. And some of the long season type things, need a longer season than planting in the middle of June. But finally, the ground dried enough that I could get the garden in. And then it seems like the rain stopped. At least where we garden in South Fargo, we weren't under the right rain cloud that passed over. And so at a certain point, sometime in July, we just stopped getting rain.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon the grass that I was loving that was so green and fresh, that started to go dormant brown. And we save our watering for the flowers in the garden and shrubs, newly planted stuff. So we don't water our lawn. And, it can go dormant, and then survive and then come back when it gets moisture again. So the grass started getting kind of brown and, I like green grass. I like green grass because it's such a nice canvas on which the rest of the yard is featured. Your perennial gardens and everything just look nice if there's some green grass like in front of it.
Yeah.
And so, it's not nearly as pleasant when that grass starts getting brown and dormant. But that kind of started. And then in July and into end of July, then things started happening. A reflection on that very, very long wet period in spring. Things started happening all of a sudden in July. Not only did it get dry, but fungi had been able to start in spring and early summer because it was so wet. And the area became a petri dish of diseases. And once those fungi, some bacteria get started and established and get a hold on leaves, they don't let go. So at a point in July, the ornamental crab apples started developing spots on leaves. Then they turned yellow. And many varieties, then the leaves all fell off. And by the end of July and early August, they were just bare of leaves from apple scab disease is what it was called, a fungal type disease. Knock on wood, hopefully they're going to be okay. And then lilacs. Many lilacs started developing yellow leaves. And they turned brown and crisp and fell off. There were old established shelter belts, tree shelter belts where the outer row is beautiful lilacs that you admire in Maytime. They're blooming as you drive out in the country. Well, those leaves got brown and crunchy by midsummer too. And I got lots of emails from farmers and people around the area that said, "What's going on? We've never had this on our lilacs, and they're nice and old." And well, it was a fungal disease that had gotten its start during that long wet period. And okay, the iris in our own perennial garden, the iris that had bloomed so beautifully and for such a long time because cool and moist, all of a sudden in July, the iris started developing leaf diseases and getting brown, and it looked like some of the underground parts, the rhizomes, were rotting. And when I've dug up to try to divide some this fall, yes, some did rot. The daylilies, which come into bloom in midsummer, our daylilies didn't do well. They had leaf diseases, foliage diseases. The blossoms were really sparse. And so in our own perennial garden, from about the middle of summer on, we could see the effects of those fungal type diseases. Especially noticeable were the iris and daylilies. And of course, then the lawn continued to get crunchier and crunchier.
Yeah.
And so, yes, absolutely, a tale of two gardening seasons. The first half, things were looking pretty good, but all of a sudden we started paying the piper from too much rain. The other thing that was fascinating also in that tale of two growing seasons, at the beginning of the growing season, our soil was so wet and squishy from all that rain that when we got some high winds, some of our established trees that had been in place 6 years tipped at a 45-degree angle. The soil was so squishy that the root system and everything just tilted. And we tried to get them back upright again. Some didn't totally get back. So we went from a squishy, wet soil to now, I tried digging our potatoes, and the ground is so hard and so dry and so cracked that I can't dig the potatoes. I'm going to have to put a sprinkler out and wet it a little bit to try to get just the right amount. If it's too wet, it'll be too wet,
too muddy,
and too muddy. If I don't get enough moisture on there, then it's still going to be too hard. So our soil, especially the heavy Red River Valley clay soil, or anybody dealing with clay type heavy soil, it just went from too squishy and gooey to hard concrete and cracked. And so the soil also, and it wasn't just me that noticed this, I've gotten emails from people that said, "What's with the soil this year?"
Yeah.
And of course, when you kind of think about that, all that heavy rain, prolonged, just squished all the air out of the soil and just compacted it. And of course, then when it stopped raining, it just baked like a clay pot. And so it's interesting. Of course, I'm always optimistic. I'm already looking for next year to be better.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got to say, this has been a challenging growing season.
Yeah, like you say, you've always said that people that you kind of like the challenges of things. You say that you
kind of learn to roll with it a little bit.
Yeah,
it doesn't do much good to kick against Mother Nature. You may as well try to work with her. And so anyway, I mentioned a couple of things that did well in our own flower garden, especially earlier. I was so happy with the peony blooms and the iris. We had an iris that our sons had given to Mary for Mother's Day a few years ago called Rare Treat, which is a blue and white two-tone. And that was especially beautiful. So the early season flowers, and the perennial salvia that I planted a few years ago called Blue Bayou, not the Louisiana Bayou, but BYOU.
Yes.
Yeah, Blue Bayou. That was absolutely stellar. In May, it just sent up the vibrant purple spikes, bluish purple, and I cut it back. It was after the first flush of bloom. If you cut it back, you'll get another flush. And I cut it back, and it did, bloomed beautifully. And of course, then July hit. But so anyway, I've got to say that the first part of the growing season is beautiful. And right now at the tail end, something that is just stellar is purple dome aster.
Okay.
A fall blooming. It doesn't start blooming until really end of September, and it is just gorgeous. It didn't get the foliage type diseases, and it's about 3 feet high, almost 3 feet wide, and just a big purple dome of blossoms. And of course, that's going to keep blooming well after frost. And I'm making a note to next spring divide that. And of course, anything blooming in the fall, you divide the opposite season. So next spring, I'm going to divide that because that would be real pretty to have more of that.
How long ago did you plant it?
That was planted about 2 years ago.
Okay, so it's already
it didn't take too long.
Established.
And so those are some of the things in our own flower garden. In vegetables, things were too late to plant to get a harvest. I got no watermelons, no squash, no pumpkins, no melons at all. The onions did well.
Okay.
Potatoes are small if I can kind of pry them out of the ground. The carrots did well. I haven't dug them yet, waiting for them to sweeten up. And so the vegetable garden, tomatoes did okay. They seem to like the heat, and we kept them watered. They seem to still are doing beautifully because we haven't had any chilly weather to speak of. And so those are some of the things that how things kind of reacted in our own flower garden. And how about you, John? What did you find?
Well, I think that this was a year for this as a case study for the benefits of this show. One of the things that we preach is patience, and
Yes.
really that this year, and again, we're Sam and I are relatively new gardeners, in the scope of things, but really seeing some things that we'd planted a couple of years ago really finally take that big step forward and really be established by themselves.
Yeah, like what?
We got a penstemon that's still really, it's got some color now. Still, it's really great. We have a sand cherry that we planted a couple years ago, and that added, kind of a bush, added some really kind of nice color for us. We have a snake root this year that bloomed,
really?
and it was really nice. We've been kind of waiting for that. We like the texture of it. We like the color of it. The thing that is interesting is that on the other side of the yard, we have salvia, we have mint, things like that are great for the pollinators, right? But
Sure.
This one really only seemed to attract hornets and wasps.
Oh,
the snake root. So it's kind of nice that one stayed over there, and then all the other
Sure.
great pollinators, the bumblebees were over here with that. And just seeing how active the pollinators were this year was really, really great. It was really, really fun to see.
Oh, yeah. And how did your raised garden do for vegetables?
And again, because I take advice from this show, this is our best year for tomatoes because we
Awesome.
mulched over very early, kept on a regular watering habit. So I did have to, even when it was raining, I would keep an eye on it, but was out there for the second half of the year just about every day, giving it some water. And that really was great. We had really good turnout with some lettuce, which again, we got in kind of early, and we planted a second round that probably only saw a couple leaves. We had squirrels later in the year get into everything, but we did get some carrots too, which was really, really nice. We've got a relatively small area for that, but we had good success with tomatoes to the point that I was reluctant to bring some inside, as it got colder. I don't think that they're ever going to turn, but it was kind of nice to hold on that we could even. I was getting greedy. I wanted more.
Well, of course, this would have been a great year for raised gardens. It was a great year for raised gardens because you could get yours planted, but because a person modifies, you develop kind of a designer type soil in that. The best soil really that could be had can be designed in a raised garden, and so you were able to plant yours while I was still trying to squish around out in ours. And then also that a wonderful organic type designer soil in a raised garden. You can dig it, your carrots you can dig, you can dig things when mine soil is too hard yet to dig. So a good, a good case for raised gardening.
And also fertilizing. Really did see the benefits of fertilizing, especially the tomatoes. Absolutely saw the benefits of that. In the past, we hadn't been as good about it. Really had great great success with that this year.
Sure. How's your clover lawn? You included a part of your yard in a clover mix, right?
We did that last summer, and this summer it came back pretty well. There were some areas because we have got dogs where they just got kind of maybe a little ripped up, but it doesn't take as much water as a grass lawn. It reseeds itself. It kind of bounces back really pretty well. So if you kind of want that, if you want something a little bit more, less uniform, a little bit more free growing as it is, you can still run a lawnmower over it and we trim it back. We've had to do that a couple times because it would grow pretty tall.
Oh, sure.
But it's
was that kind of the white Dutch clover with a round,
Yeah, and so it's been really great. That was a good thing for us to grow, and that was an area where it got a little bit more shady, so we didn't want to try new grass there. And again, with the dogs,
did the rabbits enjoy it?
We didn't see as much rabbit activity. There's a couple times,
and of course, I don't mind the rabbits in that.
In clover, that's fine.
Yeah, we've got some clover in our lawn, and I enjoy seeing the rabbits out nibbling that because I know then maybe they'll get their fill and won't bother my roses and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We did have rabbit problems in our perennial garden, eating the leaves off of the lilies and things. And so I need to address that for another year.
Well, let's take a quick little break. When we come back, more with our reflections on this past growing season.
Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month. You'll get unlimited access to the news you need to stay engaged and connected to your community. Visit inforum.com/subscribe now to get 3 months of local news for only 99 cents a month.
All right, we're back, and we're looking back over this past growing season, which is still, as we speak now, things are still growing. Things are still doing really well, but as far as the tending to, it's time to put it to bed.
I can tell our tomatoes have enjoyed this long growing season because sometimes if you've had some even chilly nights, tomatoes don't like to be even chilled. And that's why you don't store tomato fruit in the refrigerator because they develop kind of an off flavor. And so, man, the tomato fruit quality has been so good for so long because it hasn't had that chilly temperature off flavor that they get. So, man, we're still enjoying it.
So we talked about some things that that did well for us. What didn't do so well? What did you struggle with this year?
Well, I struggled in our perennial garden, like I mentioned, with foliage diseases.
Yeah.
Just because they got to start so early. The tall phlox, which are so beautiful with their big panicles of blossoms. We've got some white ones, some pink ones, and even those that said they were disease resistant came down with foliage disease. So the leaves turned yellow, dropped off. They didn't bloom very well. And of course, resistant doesn't mean immune.
Yeah.
If the disease pressure is just high, as it was this year, even resistant varieties can come down with things. And so our phlox were a disappointment. I mentioned the iris, the peonies, also and daylilies. All of those just really didn't perform very well. And I was kind of concerned about them because when plants go downhill like that, they aren't really storing up energy for next year. So I've got to admit, I'm a little concerned how some of those are going to be next year because I'm concerned that they might have gone downhill a little bit. Another emailer mentioned the same thing about their rhubarb plant. They said that their rhubarb went downhill, and even though it was an established plant, they said it looks like a 1-year plant now. It's spindly, and again, probably disease. Soil has stayed too wet, probably a little root rot. Rhubarb doesn't like it that wet. And so anyway, in a case like that too, hopefully it will regenerate itself. And so I hope next year is not going to be so wet. I might not be quite as energetic about, and I might not be quite so happy if we get lots and lots of rain. Yeah. Although it's dry, so we need that rain. But we just don't need like months of rain.
Well, yeah, we were at extremes this year.
Yes.
It was an extreme amount of rain. It was a very, very wet first half of the year. And
Yeah,
then
so
an
Mother
incredibly
Nature, how
dry.
about a little moderation?
Right. Spread it out. Spread out
Exactly.
that love
How
a
about
little
you?
bit.
What were some of the things that didn't do so well? I hate to focus on the negative, but sometimes it's important to address what didn't do so well.
Yeah, and that's like you say, that's how you grow. That's how
Exactly. We
you
learn.
learn. Yeah, that's how you learn. And one of the things that we did, we made this kind of a path along the sidewalk in front to plant in some flowers where the grass had not been doing super great, and that was really nice. But we put in, one of the things that we added there was some veronica, and I think some of the veronica in our yard is just, it seemed like maybe it was suffering from kind of maybe a powdery mildew or something like
Sure.
that. So again,
that was really prevalent.
because of the moisture, because of how wet it was this year, that was something. The other thing I got to say too is that, and this is again one of the big learning things, is one of the things that disappointed me this year is just my body not being able to get out and do all of the things for as long, because some of the days were really hot.
It was hot.
Once we got into July,
heat.
there were some things that I wanted to do and to move, and I still have to want to tear up some sod in an area. Now that it's cool, it'd probably be a good time to do that. But
that's a good point.
I would have to do it.
We had extended heat again, which was just physically made it hard to be out doing some things like weeding.
Yes, I didn't get a great jump on weeding. I did some spot spraying in the spring, but I didn't do it in the fall, so I missed that.
I need to do that yet.
Do we still have time,
we could still do it because the weeds are actively growing.
Okay.
And so that's on my to-do list. Really, we've, even after some frost, the weeds, perennial type weeds, they still persist through some frost. So really the next week or so, until, 20th or 25th of October, we could still be doing some spot spraying of weeds.
And then also I didn't get around to, because I was waiting for precipitation and to fertilize our yard, fertilize the grass. And I was kind of waiting for that because we had street, they're putting in a new street in front of our house. So we lost access to the hose for the front of the house. So I wasn't able to do it up there. And I kept thinking like, oh, well, I'll wait. And I should have just watered and fertilized and then watered it in again in the back. But
sure, because I fertilized around Labor Day, the recommended, but no moisture, no rain came, and I couldn't water everything. And so I don't know, the granules are probably just sitting there waiting for next year, but next spring until we get some moisture. And so it's interesting. Well, the old saying, count the day lost, you don't learn something new.
Right.
Well, let's at the whole growing season had plenty to learn from. Many of us who kind of follow diseases, including some plant pathology friends, say they've never seen diseases so active as they were on the ornamental crab apples and lilacs. I mean, this is almost unheard of in recorded history that happened to lilacs. By the way, anybody that's listening too, I've got lots of emails from lilacs that started blooming in the fall here.
Oh.
And that was in reaction to this stress. It kind of kicks in a natural response in some plants to try to propagate themselves. If they're under stress, we'll maybe perpetuate the species. Maybe I need to bloom and produce some seeds. And so oftentimes stress, like we had the last half of the season, will kick in, and disease pressure kick in that response to flower. And so that's kind of what went on this year. So an exceptionally really unusual growing season. So I guess things that I learned was that, wow, when we have that much rain that early, not only can it be difficult to plant, but it can really initiate some diseases.
Yeah.
And so in a minute, we'll talk about some resolutions for next year. So that kind of leads me to think about some resolutions too. But I guess I learned from this growing season that things can really quickly turn.
Yeah.
From one extreme to another.
Yep.
And so it was kind of fun to reflect on that. And of course, the disease in our own perennial flower garden, that has taught me a lesson. And a big lesson I learned this year is that you should not get up on a 10-foot ladder with a chainsaw because we might have mentioned in a podcast, I was doing what is not recommended, and that was cutting limbs off of a big old dead tree up on a ladder with a chainsaw, and one of the limbs fell, knocked the ladder out from under me. I fell. Luckily, only dislocated a shoulder. It could have been much worse. So anyway, I learned that, well, you're never too old to learn.
Yes.
And I learned that, yes, that's a good recommendation. Don't be up on a ladder with a chainsaw. Leave the high climbing to a professional who uses bucket lifts instead of standing on a ladder. Well, how about you? Anything that stuck out in your mind that you learned this year?
I mean, again, it's just the kind of the underscoring of patience and, keep at things, be persistent on, be diligent about doing things in your yard. And it's also just, and we've talked about this too, that it's just rewarding to be out there, to even do something like weeding. So just kind of try to make the time to do those things. And that is kind of a reward in of its in and of
it
itself.
is. And making time to do those things, that is an investment in the future, whether it's making time to weed or fertilize. All of those things are an investment into the future. So our growing seasons aren't just kind of a circle in which we're chasing our tail, it keeps going around in a circle, but it's more of an onward and upward spiral. We use what we learn. And so next year we'll use what we learned. And so it's, even though the seasons come in kind of a cycle, it's not a circle. It kind of cycles upward and onward. And if I use what I learn, next year's going to be better.
And one of the other things too is really, again, seeing the benefits of fertilizing. I talked about that in our tomatoes, but having done it last fall in the grass, then this fall in the grass in the lawn, did see the benefits from that, and also the benefits of it helping the good healthy grass coming in, helping choke out and block out some of the weeds is really nice. Right. But then also just seeing the benefits of fertilizing your flowers, your plants.
Definitely,
really seeing some really great growth there. And
that's true. It's not just a nice little extra. It's really, you really reap the benefits. And I can see on our lawn where I missed a spot.
Yeah, I got a little too. I didn't get close enough to the edge, and you could see it. But also, but I wondered too this year, because we were good about fertilizing some plants early on, if that maybe helped as this summer went on and got stressful, that they had a good kind of a foundation of
better root system.
They had that push to grow early.
Sure, and could pump moisture from the depths a little better too. So even if you weren't watering, they could access some moisture.
I've talked about this a number of times, but we've got a maple tree to the side of our house that suffers from chlorosis. And so we went out and I did it a couple of times early in the spring and closer to summer, but added chelated iron. Awesome. And really, by this time last year, probably by September 1st last year, the tree was bare. All of the leaves had fallen down because they weren't getting in.
Sure.
And
so they clung on.
They clung on and they turned yellow earlier. But my hope is that by still being on, they still are taking in some energy.
Oh, definitely.
And
so an investment in the future.
Forward. Yeah. So, those kinds of things that kind of seem like maybe drudgery work or, are a little difficult to do, they do pay off. There's a benefit to doing that.
They really do. Well, do you have some resolutions for next year? To me, these gardening resolutions are better made now while everything's fresh in mind rather than wait until New Year's to make the resolutions.
Well, one of the things in talking about it with it being with a frost coming, we tried to do clippings of coleus last year.
Oh, yeah.
And what we did is we had it in a room that had been the previous owner had a dark room there. So it was a nice
I'm seeing plant lights.
Yes, so I moved
the dark room.
I moved in some fluorescent lights and it was all set to go. Did it, but then I noticed that they seemed to be wilting, and had them get water. Well, what I think I realized is that there wasn't enough air circulation, so there was kind of mold basically.
Sure.
So we've got a couple of small fans. So again, we're going to try that this year. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. And if we can get the coleus to grow and be established, then we're going to try doing some plantings from seeds so that we have
nice.
a good jump start on next year. That's something that we're very much looking forward to. And yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. And of course, on my resolution list is always keep better up on the weeds. You know, I mean, that's one I have every year, and I try as best I can. On my list of resolutions is to be better at labeling things.
Yes.
Okay, you know, when you buy a new perennial or shrub or something, okay, it's got the plant tag. And something, okay, I take the plant tag for a perennial, you take the tag out of the pot, and then I kind of sink it down in by the perennial. But of course, that's going to get brittle within a season or so, or maybe the wind will blow it out and I'll lose that identity. And it's so important to maintain the identity of a named plant because that is the key to looking up the care for it. You know, maybe the tag has that care, but I mean, it's, you know, man, none of us would like to go through life nameless.
No.
And most plants, that is just such a key. You know, and if you ever share your plants, which is fun with somebody else, it's important to know that white phlox is David. Because knowing that it's David, oh, that one does have some disease resistance, a beautiful white phlox. And so I need to do a better job of labeling the perennials with a more of a permanent type of label on those. And also, I need to do a better job of just keeping a simple record book. Right now, when I do label something with a permanent, I like the little metal zinc labels that you just write on with a pencil. It lasts really quite long. And let me tell you how I learned that those metal zinc labels, and if you do online search, metal zinc labels, you just write on them with a pencil and you think, pencil, is that going to last? Well, Sharpie doesn't last very long on things either. That'll fade. But there was one, you know, these big old metal threshing machines?
Yeah.
You know, out on our farm, there's an old one, I suppose from the, 1930s or 40s that was hauled off into the trees there. But it was right beside where we used to garden. And I remember as a kid looking at it, and on the side of that kind of tin-looking metal were the number of bushels that they had harvested each year, and it was written in pencil. And 50 years later, it was still there. So anyway, if you use these zinc labels, and you can buy them, they aren't too expensive, and just write on them with a pencil. And old Professor Neil Holland taught me that too. If you want something to last, use pencil, number 2 lead pencil, and write on metal. It lasts.
Really?
Ballpoint pen fades and washes off. Sharpies fade. Even the long-lasting ones fade. And so, yeah. So anyway, long story for my point, I need to label more. I need to have a little better record books on things. And that's probably one of my main resolutions. Well, and keep planting. I love to keep trying new things, examine new things, try some new things, get rid of something that isn't performing as well, and get some new varieties incorporated. So I'm already excited. I mean, I'm not wishing my time away, but I'm going to enjoy the winter, but I'm already looking forward to next spring. I'm looking forward to this winter, looking at the catalogs, examining some new things. And so I already in my mind, I'm starting to think about and enjoy the spring to come.
Another thing, talking about what we learned and what we'll do different next year is seeing that, we were so happy with the early rains. We were seeing everything coming in and being lush and green earlier than it ever had been before. Then we also realizes that we had overplanted in some areas and we really needed to thin it out. So that's something I really want to do early next spring, like as things, most of them are hostas, things like that are, as they start coming up, to dig them up, maybe split them up and kind of parse it around a little bit, move some things around just to give things a little bit more space to grow in really well.
But they always look so cute when they're tiny.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, they look too small.
They do. And so, spacing is always, that's always a challenge. One final resolution that I have, based on how much disease that we had, I am going to buy and have on hand ahead of time fungicide. One of the two active ingredients, one is chlorothalonil. That's a mouthful, but it's the active ingredient in many all-purpose flower and vegetable fungicides. Another one are the copper-type fungicides. And I'm going to have that on hand. And you see, the problem is, like this year, once you started seeing the effects of these diseases, it's too late to apply fungicides. They're preventatives. So I am going to have fungicide on hand, and I'm going to proactively treat the iris and daylilies and peonies and all the things that were really harmed by disease this year. I'm going to have that on hand. I might even buy it. I might even buy it now. If you keep it above freezing, it'll store fine. And spring gets busy. I want to make sure I have that preventative fungicide on hand.
That's a good thing, because sometimes those things will be not easy to find, and also the prices may go up. So,
well, that's true.
Get in on them now if somebody's having a fall sale and trying to move stuff off the shelves.
It's been fun to reflect on this growing season. And of course, our podcast will continue all winter long.
Yep.
And it's kind of fun as gardeners. You kind of transition from the outside at a certain point to doing things inside. So it's going to be fun to continue to talk about things in these podcasts.
And then as we get into, maybe into January, February, March, start talking about, again, getting back out in the yard and planning what we're planning to
I'm going
plant.
to be curious to see what's new. There's always new things invented and plants developed. And so I'm already looking forward to see. I wonder what new things are on the horizon.
I see people counting down to Halloween, obviously, counting down to Thanksgiving, counting down to Christmas and New Year. And I know that New Year for you means new garden catalogs,
seed catalogs.
That's something that you're counting down.
That with a cup of coffee is about as good as life gets.
Well, Don, thanks again for coming in this week. If people have any questions for you, if they want to share with you what worked or what didn't work, or if they have questions about what's going on in their yard, what's the best way to reach you?
Oh, and it's great to hear from those of you who have emailed me in. Send me an email, donald.kinsler, KINZLER, @ndsu.edu.
All right, Don. Well, thanks again, and we'll talk to you next week.
John, and thanks everyone for listening. Have a great week.